All right, ladies and gentlemen, to finish up Supplement D, what I want you to understand for the remaining problems that they give you, I want you to really just understand what they're asking you, because a lot of my past students weren't even sure what they were supposed to do. I'm not going to go through every single problem step by step, because the department key for each one of these problems is actually quite good. All right? The key's wonderful. But I want you to understand what they're asking you and how they came up with the key. So let's take problem number 11, for example. Okay? Here, this graph is a graph that's given to you. That is called f of x. And you are to use this graph every time you do problem 11. Then you go back to this graph when you do problem number 12. Then you go back to this graph when you do problem 13, and so on. So in other words, you always refer back to this graph to start with. Question number 11 asks you to graph f of x plus 1. Now notice that the plus 1, okay, is with the x. So what that means is it's not an up or down movement, it's left or right if it involves x. And remember that it always works backwards. So if it's x plus 1, it wants you to move it 1 to the left. So what they really would want you to do to come up with the answer for number 11 is they would want you to take this graph and literally shift it 1 unit to the left. And see, that's what they did over here on their answer key. They took the original picture and they shifted the entire graph 1 unit to the left. That was the original graph. It is now moved over 1 unit to the left. And what that, of course, accomplishes is, you see how these 4 ordered pairs were given? If you're moving something 1 unit to the left, then what happens is every one of these points, the x value would be 1 less than it was before. So instead of this being a 4, it's now a 3. Instead of this x value being a 1, it's now a 0. So basically that's what they're asking you to do. So how would you work problem number 12? Well, f of x minus 1. This time you would move the graph 1 to the right. The reason you know it's either a left or right hand move is the minus 1 is with the x. Whenever you're dealing with the x shift, it always does backwards to what you're going to think. So what you would actually do to get the answer to number 12 is take the original graph and slide the entire graph 1 to the right. So see what they did to come up with their answer for number 12 is they took the original picture and they moved it 1 to the right. And just to show you, on the original graph you had the point 1, 0. Well, on the answer to problem 12 it would be 2, 0. Because if you're moving it 1 to the right, every x value would increase by 1. And that's basically the way this whole game works, okay? Problem number 13. They're asking you to graph f of x minus 2. Well, hopefully what you would recognize here is that the minus 2 does not go with the x because it's not in the parens. So minus 2 at the end of f of x is a y value. It affects the y value, so we would either go up or down, and in this particular case a minus 2 tells me to go down. So I would take this entire graph and I would physically, if I could grab hold of this, I would physically pull it down 2 units. Another way of saying that is I would take every one of these ordered pairs and subtract 2 from the y value and leave x alone. So for example, this used to be the ordered pair 1, 0. In my answer, okay, see the answer to question number 13? It's the ordered pair 1, negative 2. Basically, that's what this entire graphing sheet is trying to get you to see. And let's look at this. Number 14, the opposite of f of x. Well, f of x is y. When you're taking the opposite of y, what you're basically doing, okay, let's pretend I'm up here in quadrant 1. The opposite of y would take me down here. It would cross, I would cross over the x-axis. So anytime you're finding the opposite of f of x, you're finding a reflection with respect to the x-axis. So notice what they did. In their answer key, they're just telling you that they took the original picture, which looked like this, and they reflected it with respect to the x-axis. Now, another way you could do that, instead of just reflecting it, is you could multiply every one of the old y values by -1 and come up with the new y value. All right? So, for example, this used to be the ordered pair for -2. It would now be the ordered pair for +2. And that's how they ended up there. All right, so this is how this works. F of the opposite of x. Well, if the x value is being multiplied by -1, you're basically crossing the y-axis. So this would be a reflection across the y-axis. And so on and so on and so on. So this is exactly how this part works. But I wanted you to catch the fact that to come up with these answers, you could work with the ordered pairs, but you also need to know how to say it in words. And every time you're working these questions, remember, when you're working question number 11, you start back with this original picture. 12, you start with the original picture. 13, you start with the original picture, and so on. Okay. All this is meant to do, this is a departmental worksheet that's meant to reinforce what we've already done with reflection, shifting, stretchings, translations. Okay, and again, practice makes perfect. All right.